The viewport of the private station offered an endless vista of stars scattered across the obsidian canvas of space, like jewels cast by a careless hand. Verena stood at the reinforced glass, her azure skin almost glowing in the reflected starlight, her long white hair flowing down her back like a waterfall of moonlight. Her emerald dress clung to her elegant frame, and the rare furs at her collar spoke of wealth accumulated across 3 decades of shrewd trading. She was troubled, though she would never admit it to anyone in the station. Her reflection stared back at her from the glassa, successful merchant of the Andromeda trading zone. Feared and respected in equal measure, yet somehow empty in ways she refused to examine too closely. Lady Verena spoke a quiet command, and a holographic display materialized before her, showing the profile of the man she'd decided to hire against better judgment, Callum Reed. The name alone carried weight. Former Terran Defense Force operative, dishonorably discharged under classified circumstances. When she'd requested his full background report, even her considerable resources had hit walls, and that intrigued her as much as it unsettled her. The image showed a human male of perhaps 30 years, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the tracery of scars crossing his left cheek and jaw. His gray eyes were sharp, alert, and startlingly intelligent. She'd interviewed 17 candidates for the position of personal bodyguard. The previous guardians had all been Taurian males, products of the Empire's military academies, disciplined and utterly predictable. But predictability had become a liability in recent years. Someone had been moving against her interests, subtle moves, carefully concealed, but definite nonetheless. She needed someone who thought differently. She needed someone unpredictable. Humans were unpredictable. They were also considered emotional, irrational, and dangerous by most established species in the galactic community. Yet, in the 3 centuries since they'd achieved faster-than-light travel, they'd carved out a respectable position through sheer tenacity and an ability to survive situations that would have annihilated more civilized species. Verena wasn't sure if that made them more trustworthy or less. A soft chime pulled her from her thoughts. "My lady," came the voice of Tertius, her house steward, through the communication link. "The candidate has arrived. He's in the entry chamber, awaiting your pleasure." Verena straightened her posture, pulling on the imperious bearing expected of someone of her station. Years of practice made it second nature now. "Send him in, Tertius. And monitor the interaction from the security station. I want everything recorded, as you wish, my lady." The doors to her private chambers slid open with barely a whisper of sound. Callum Reed stepped through, and immediately Verena's analytical mind began cataloging details. He wore simple dark armor of Terran design, functional rather than decorative, with none of the ornate flourishes favored by Taurian security personnel. A compact pulse pistol was holstered at his hip. She had no doubt he carried at least 3 other weapons concealed somewhere on his person. Trained, then, careful, dangerous, he moved with the economical grace of a predator, his eyes taking in the chamber in a single sweeping glance before settling on her. When he inclined his head in greeting, it was a gesture that acknowledged her status without quite reaching the level of deference she was accustomed to. The small breach of protocol irritated her and intrigued her in equal measure. "Lady Verena," he said, his voice carrying a Terran accent softened by years spent among other species. "Thank you for considering my application." "Mr. Reed," she replied coolly, circling him slowly as she might examine a piece of artwork being considered for purchase. "Your credentials are impressive. Your journey here was uneventful, I trust." "As uneventful as passage through pirate-infested space can be," he replied, and she caught the slight quirk of his lips. "Your escort ships are efficient, professional," she noted, the way his eyes tracked her movement while simultaneously noting exits, threat vectors, and the placement of defensive systems. He was assessing her territory even now. She appreciated the caution, though she would never say so aloud. "Your military record is decorated," she said, resuming her position before him. "And yet you seek employment as a personal bodyguard. Most would consider that a step downward." "The private sector pays better than government work," he answered without hesitation, "and the work is more honest." The comment caught her slightly off guard. She'd expected deflection or flattery. You find government work dishonest? Don't you? His gray eyes met hers directly, unafraid of her scrutiny. I've served in enough wars to know that people in power rarely send soldiers into battle for the reasons they claim. It was bold, perhaps too bold, but she found herself respecting it. And would it trouble you to work for a non-human employer? Most humans of your military background prefer. I fought alongside Centurions, Proxians, and even a few Torians in my time, he interrupted gently. Species matters less to me than character, Lady Verena. I go where the work is honest and the employer worth serving. She studied him for a long moment, searching for signs of flattery or calculation in his expression. She found none. Instead, she saw something that unsettled her, straightforwardness that seemed entirely genuine. You understand that this position requires absolute loyalty. My business affairs are complex and not always conducted according to conventional regulations. I'm not being hired as your moral compass, he replied, a hint of amusement in his eyes. Just to keep you alive. Despite herself, Verena felt a small smile curve her lips. Very well. Tertius will show you to your quarters. You begin immediately. She turned away, moving back toward the viewport. One more thing, Mr. Reed. He paused at the door. Yes, Lady Verena. Trust is earned in my household, she said quietly, not looking at him. Until you've earned mine, expect to be tested.
Oh.
There was a moment of silence. Then, I'd be disappointed if you didn't, my lady. After he left, Verena remained at the viewport, staring out at the infinite stars. This human was something entirely different from what she'd hired before. Most bodyguards understood their role: serve, obey, fade into the background. They did not meet her eyes with such directness or speak with such honesty, and they certainly did not make her feel that inexplicable warmth spreading through her chest. When she thought about them, she tapped her wrist communicator. Tertius, I want you to monitor Mr. Reed closely. Set up the standard series of tests. The usual protocol, my lady? Her steward's voice was carefully neutral, as Verena decided. Let's see how truly honest our new guardian is. What she didn't say, which she would never admit even to herself in that moment, was that she was already curious about the answer. 3 standard weeks had passed since Callum Reed stepped into Verena's employ. In that time, he had become an almost invisible presence in her life, always there when needed, never intrusive, moving through her estate with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything. And he had passed every test she devised with an ease that was beginning to frustrate her. The misplaced security codes had been turned without comment. The attractive courier she'd sent to extract information had been politely but firmly rebuffed. Even the staged assassination attempt had been thwarted, with such surgical precision that the would-be attacker had spent 3 days in medical recovery. Verena should have been satisfied. Instead, she found herself increasingly distracted. You're not listening, Tertius said gently, bringing her attention back to the present. The steward was reviewing the evening's reception logistics with her, but her mind had wandered somewhere far more dangerous. I am, Verena lied, smoothing the fabric of her deep emerald gown. Tonight would host representatives from 7 trading houses, all eager to negotiate new shipping contracts with her company. It was also, she had decided, the perfect opportunity for her final and most elaborate test. Hours earlier, she had opened her private vault and removed a small velvet pouch containing 12 ancient gold coin-stone artifacts from before humanity's space age, worth a small fortune to the right collectors. She'd placed them conspicuously on her desk, then summoned Tertius with specific instructions. Ensure that Mr. Reed is assigned to my personal chambers tonight rather than the reception hall, she'd said, and make certain he's aware of my carelessness with these valuable items. Her steward had bowed without comment, but she'd caught the knowing look in his eyes. Tertius had served her for 15 years and had witnessed all her previous hiring cycles. He probably suspected what she was doing, though he would never presume to comment on it now. As the reception reached its peak in the grand hall, below merchants from Proxima engaging in the elaborate dance of negotiation that characterized galactic commerce, Verena excused herself from her guests and slipped away, Moving silently through the corridors of her estate, she approached her private chambers where Callum should be standing guard. She paused at the corner, activating a small handheld device that allowed her to view the corridor ahead through its security feeds. Callum stood at attention beside her door, his posture alert despite the late hour. Perfect, Verena triggered the security. Alert, she had pre-programmed a minor disturbance in the East Wing that would require his immediate attention. She watched through the device as he received the notification on his wrist unit. He hesitated for just a moment, his gray eyes flicking back toward her chamber door, and in that hesitation, she saw conflict. Then he moved swiftly down the corridor away from her chambers, the moment he disappeared from view. She slipped into her rooms and concealed herself behind an ornate privacy screen, her heart beating faster than she would have liked to admit. Now to wait, it took precisely 7 minutes before she heard him return. She could track his movements by sound alone. Now, he checked the corridor carefully before re-entering, then moved directly to her desk where the coins remained. Her breath caught as she watched him pick up the velvet pouch. His scarred face, illuminated by the soft light of her desk lamp. "Gotcha," she whispered to herself. A mixture of disappointment and vindication washing over her, Callum opened the pouch. Examining the ancient coins briefly, his expression was unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he moved not toward the door, but toward her private safe. With quick, practiced movements, he entered a sequence code-to-code, she was absolutely certain. She had never shared with him and carefully placed the coins inside before securing it again. Verena's eyes widened. This was not what she had anticipated. She waited until he resumed his position by the door before emerging from her hiding place, deliberately making enough noise to alert him to her presence. She wanted to see his reaction, wanted to see if guilt would show on his face. Callum turned to face her. She searched his features carefully. There was no sign of deception, no flash of panic, only a subtle shift in his posture that suggested he'd known exactly where she was the entire time. "My lady," he said, inclining his head. "I thought you were attending to your guests downstairs." "Clearly I wasn't," she replied, her voice carefully controlled. "What were you doing at my safe?" "Securing your property," he answered without hesitation, meeting her gaze directly. "Your steward provided the code when I was hired. It's standard security protocol for personal security officers. I'm to ensure valuable items aren't left unsecured." "The coins," she said, watching him closely. "You saw them on my desk? Safer in your vault than on your desk during a reception with 50 strangers in the building?" he replied calmly. "You have valuable items throughout this chamber. It would have taken me 5 minutes to catalog them, and 10 more to remove them if I'd been inclined toward theft. Instead, I secured what was immediately vulnerable." Verena studied his face, searching for any sign of deception, any micro-expression that might indicate he was lying. She found nothing. This man either was exactly as he presented himself, competent, honest professional lore. He was the most skilled manipulator she'd ever encountered. "Return to your post," she said finally, dismissing him with a wave of her hand. That night, after her guests had departed and the estate grew quiet, Verena found herself unable to sleep. She sat at her desk, staring at the space where the coins had been. And for the first time in her career as a merchant, she questioned her own instincts. Callum Reed continued to confound her expectations. Perhaps one final, more direct test was needed. The following morning, she summoned him to her private study. She had spent the restless night reviewing security footage of his actions over the past weeks. Watching him move through her estate with quiet competence, his behavior was impeccable, frustratingly so. There were no instances of him taking anything that didn't belong to him. No conversations that suggested divided loyalties. No hidden communications with potential enemies. He arrived precisely on time. His dark armor polished to a subtle sheen that absorbed rather than reflected light. He wore simplicity like other men wore status symbols, and it suited him. "You wanted to see me, Lady Verena?" His voice betrayed no concern, though he must have sensed the tension in her posture. She rose from her chair, her emerald gown rustling softly as she moved around the desk. For the first time since hiring him, she allowed herself to acknowledge what had been growing in her chest for weeks. Dangerous attraction that complicated everything. "Hey, I find myself curious about something." Mr. Reed, she said, stopping directly before him, close enough that she had to tilt her head back slightly to meet his gaze. By Taurian standards, this proximity was intimate, almost confrontational. She noted with interest that his pulse, visible at his throat, remained steady. "I'm at your disposal," he replied. And there was something in his voice now, a subtle deepening, perhaps a recognition of what she was doing. "All these tests," she said quietly. "All these games. Why have you indulged them? Why not simply demand to know what you've done to earn this level of suspicion?" Callum was silent for a long moment, because he finally said, his gray eyes never leaving hers, "I'm beginning to understand that your tests have nothing to do with whether I'm honest, Lady Verena. They have to do with whether you can trust yourself around me." The accusation, spoken so gently, struck her like a physical blow. Before she could formulate a response, he inclined his head respectfully and turned to leave. "Mr. Reed?" she called after him, her voice barely above a whisper. He paused at the door, looking back over his shoulder. "Don't go," she said, and the words felt like surrender.